Toxic boss gets instant karma. You won't believe what happened next. The words still ring in my ears. A constant, taunting echo. You'll never make it without this job. He sneered, his face a mask of smug superiority. A slow, satisfied smile crept across my face. Actually, I replied, savoring the moment. I just accepted a better offer. His face paled as he finally registered who my new employer was. This wasn't just about a job. It was about survival. About escaping the soul-crushing grip of a toxic tyrant. Before this nightmare began, I was just trying to survive, grinding away at a mid-sized marketing agency. It wasn't my dream, not even close. Bills demanded to be paid. Initially, it seemed okay, stable, predictable. The paycheck covered rent, groceries, and the occasional night out. The work itself, I was good, damn good. One of the best, in fact. But then Lanford arrived. The Glassdoor reviews turned into a horrifying reality show. A complete restructuring was required to accommodate his monstrous ego. He dismissed hard work, reveled in humiliating employees in front of everyone. There were no raised voices, just the quiet, calculated cuts. A slow, agonizing torture of the soul. While he'd say, dripping with sarcasm, "Did we slow down time just for you?" I wanted to scream, to unleash the fury that simmered beneath the surface. But I knew I had to stay quiet, keep my head down and endure. I nodded through his condescending advice, silently absorbing his insults. I endured the abuse because I desperately needed this job, until the day I didn't. It started like any other Monday morning. I arrived at 8:45 am, a mere 15 minutes before the official start time. The office was already a hive of activity, a symphony of keyboard clicks and forced enthusiasm. I settled into my desk, opened my inbox, and began to skim through the endless stream of emails. Routine client updates, a request for a status report from my supervisor, and then that email, an all-caps monstrosity from Lanford himself, sent at 3:12 am. He wrote, "Where's the campaign proposal?" The irony dripped like poison. He either ignored my emails or pretended to delete them only to blame everyone else or his lack of organization. I forwarded the proposal without a word and plunged back into the maelstrom of work. By 10:30 am, he emerged from his office, Starbucks cup in hand, the image of a modern-day Caesar. Despite his wife's constant nagging for him to cut back, he loved the image of power that it exuded. He stood in the middle of the office, cleared his throat dramatically, silencing the chaotic hum. The silence was suffocating. "I wonder," he began, tilting his head in my direction, "how some people just coast by it." I didn't look up. Not yet. Maybe, just maybe, he was talking about someone else. Someone who wasn't me. But my heart hammered in my chest. They somehow think they deserve a promotion. It was me. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues. The quick, furtive glances. My hand froze on my keyboard, rage simmering thus below the surface. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to lash out, to tell him that I had never missed a deadline in my life, to tell him that I had carried more projects and half the senior staff combined. But I didn't, he continued, his voice laced with contempt. "Some people think they're irreplaceable, but let's be honest. How long would it take for me to find someone better? A week? A day? That was it. The snapping point. The moment when something inside me finally broke. I stood up and reached for the neatly folded paper in my desk drawer. My resignation. I walked toward his desk. The paper a tangible symbol of my newfound freedom. Lanford frowned, a flicker of annoyance on his face. But as soon as he unfolded the letter, his face underwent a remarkable transformation. I watched it happen in real time. A slow-motion train wreck of realization and dawning horror. It was the page where the name of my new employer was written, bolded, Sterling and Partners. I watched him swallow, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He knew exactly who they were. Sterling and Partners, the firm that was breathing down his neck, the firm that had poached to major clients last year, the company that had been slowly creeping into his territory. They had hired me. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. I turned and walked back to my desk, my heart pounding with adrenaline. Langford didn't call me back. For the first time in 4 years, I had nothing to say. I sat down, logged out of my computer, grabbed my bag, and walked out before lunch. Finally free. I wish I could tell you that was the end of the story, that I rode off into the sunset and never looked back. But it wasn't. The story had just begun. Sterling and Partners launched a major campaign, one that specifically targeted Langford's biggest client. Within a week, that client left his company and signed with us. Rumors spread like wildfire. There was an emergency board meeting, whispers of a complete restructuring. By the end of the quarter, Langford was gone. I thrived at Sterling and Partners, a higher salary, a better team, and a boss who actually valued my work. But the best part of it all, every morning, I sat at my new desk with a cup of high-quality coffee, basking in the glow of freedom. Because sometimes, karma doesn't need to be forced. It just needs a sleek, modern office, floor-to-ceiling windows, and espresso machines that actually worked. I was no longer bracing myself for my daily dose of public humiliation, no longer dreading the sound of my name, no longer forced to change my voice to appease a tyrannical boss. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. My official title was Senior Marketing Consultant, but I was so much more. I had the freedom to make my own decisions, the freedom to pitch ideas without fear, and, most importantly, freedom from Langford's toxic shadow. At first, it felt strange. I had been conditioned to expect hostility, to anticipate some passive-aggressive remark after every success. But here, my boss, Victoria Monroe, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who saw right through corporate BS, actually thanked me after my first successful campaign. And when I stayed late to finalize a presentation, she told me to go home and get some rest. It took time to unlearn my old habits, to stop flinching when I heard my name in a meeting, to truly believe that I wasn't about to be blindsided by another Langford-style attack. But soon, I started to thrive. Meanwhile, Langford's company was dying a slow, agonizing death. Connected co-workers whispered to me about Langford's misfortune. I assumed he would huff and puff, maybe smear my name behind closed doors, but ultimately move on. I was wrong. The first sign that things were going downhill came through an old co-worker, Travis, one of the only decent people in that office. He texted me out of the blue, his message almost gleeful. Langford is losing it. I called him immediately. What happened? I asked, barely containing my curiosity. Travis let out a low chuckle. Apparently, after you left, two more employees followed suit, people who have been quietly waiting for an excuse to escape. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Our biggest client, the one you have personally built a relationship with over the years, they were on the verge of leaving. He's been in back-to-back meetings all week. Travis was barely containing his laughter, happy how people finally realized they didn't want to be treated like disposable garbage, or like they had to sleep with an authentic smile. Travis enjoyed watching it all unravel. It wasn't just the clients. The reputation was crumbling. The people who had spent years tolerating his arrogance were finally realizing his true nature. Employees were looking for jobs. The emergency meeting that sealed his fate wasn't authentically trying to save his image. Unfortunately for him, it didn't lie about his work habits. The company's financial report showed a steady decline. Backstabbing surveys were brutally honest. And worst of all, the CEO himself had been keeping tabs on Langford's antics. He walked out of that meeting looking like he had been hit by a freight train. And by the end of the quarter, he was gone. I didn't celebrate, not at first. I wanted to be mature about it, to tell myself that it wasn't personal, that this was just business. But then I ran into someone who made the victory so much sweeter. Because Langford wasn't just fired, he was blacklisted. I couldn't help but smile. I wasn't actively keeping tabs on him. But life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. It started by accident. I was at a networking event downtown, the kind where the appetizers are microscopic and the egos are massive. I was trying to escape a painfully dull conversation with some VP of something or other, and I heard a voice behind me, a voice with the kind of exaggerated bravado that made me physically pause. I turned my head slightly, and there he was. He looked different. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by something cheaper, ill-fitting. His meticulously groomed hair had grown out unevenly, like he spent the last few months grinding his teeth. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year, and judging by the way his eyes darted around the room, scanning for potential employers, Langford wasn't just out of work. He was struggling. I lingered near the bar, watching him approach a group of younger professionals, trying to charm his way back into the game. But their eyes glazed over, their smiles strained, and one by one, they found excuses to walk away uninterested. The company just collapsed, he said to one young, uninterested woman, trying desperately to salvage the situation. They tried to hold things together, but let's be real, it was doomed from the start. I nearly laughed out loud. Langford hadn't left. He had been pushed out, and the company hadn't collapsed. It had thrived. His departure allowed the toxic culture to slowly heal, and his employees were rewarded for his actions. Langford's lies only made me more angry, so I was not buying into any of that. I shook my head and turned away, ready to let it go, until I heard my name. Yeah, I had this one employee. He was saying, his voice dripping with resentment, acted like she was making some power move. Bet she's already realizing it was a huge mistake. Her new career probably has crashed and burned. I went still. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him, but no. He was talking about me. He still couldn't accept responsibility for his own actions. He still needed to tear other people down to make himself feel important. I exhaled slowly. Fine, if he wanted to lie about what happened, then maybe, just maybe, he deserved a little reminder. I took my time, preparing myself to deliver a dramatic speech, one that would finally put him in his place. But that wasn't necessary. Instead, I waited for the silence to settle in the air until he finally turned around. I saw the moment he looked in my direction. So the moment he recognized my face, a brief flicker of recognition, a brief hesitation, the twitch of his jaw like he was debating whether to acknowledge me or pretend he hadn't seen me. I made the decision for him. I stepped forward, offered a polite but deliberate smile. The people around him perked up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Langford," I called out, my voice sweet as honey. The arrogance was still there, but it was muted, tinged with a hint of desperation. I tilted my head, as if considering something. "I couldn't help but overhear your story. Isn't it funny how you left that company and then it mysteriously started doing better?" A flicker of irritation crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Well," he said, trying to sound dismissive, "I'm sure they think they're doing better, but the real impact of losing someone like me, that takes time to show." Then, casually, I said, "I actually spoke to Travis the other day. He mentioned how much easier things have been since you left. Better client relationships, improved employee retention, and they finally got rid of that burnt coffee pot." A few people around us smirked. For the first time in his life, Langford was at a loss for words. "Would you be interested in hearing about our offers?" someone asked him. "No," I said, "that would be a great move," he was told. And for the first time in his life, he wanted nothing to do with Sterling, and I were happy to oblige. "No," I said, looking toward my old boss as my eyes slowly began to turn into an evil shade of blue. He didn't have the upper hand. He didn't care. I simply needed the situation to be what I had always desired. I could have left it there. I could have walked away knowing he would spend the rest of the night dwelling on his own humiliation. But I decided to twist the knife just a little bit more. "By the way," I said over my shoulder, "Sterling and Partners is hiring. I heard from my bosses that they were thrilled with what I had. If you want, I can get you an application." Langford was blacklisted. I had heard it from industry insiders weeks ago. After the fallout from his firing, no one wanted to take the risk of associating with someone with a reputation for driving away clients and alienating employees. The color drained from his face. He didn't respond. I didn't need him to. I walked away, leaving him standing there, his ego shattered beyond repair. That night, as I left the event and stepped into the cool Dallas night, I felt a sense of closure. For years, I had let Langford's criticisms chip away at my self-worth, but now, he was just a bitter old man, grasping at a past that no longer existed. I felt I finally had freedom. That was the last time I ever saw him. I had made my point, walked away with my head held high, and left him standing there with nothing but his own shattered pride. But life has a funny way of giving you bonus rounds, because a few weeks later, I got an email from Victoria Monroe, my boss at Sterling and Partners. The subject line read, "Define interesting inquiry." The email read, "I thought you'd like to see this." I thought of a new client and was thrilled, but instead what I saw made me laugh out loud. Attached was a forwarded job application, and I couldn't believe who it was. All the humiliation, after publicly mocking me in front of my old colleagues. The email was from Langford, and not just any job, a mid-level marketing consultant role, not an executive spot, not a managerial role, not even a senior position, a job that was, at best, 3 steps below the level he used to have. The irony was too much. I stared at the email, rereading it, waiting for some hidden punchline. Langford, the same man who once smirked and said, "We'll never make it without this job," was now applying to work under me. Oh, the poetic justice. It was all I could wish for. Victoria must have sensed my glee, because she followed up with a second email almost immediately. "Take your time," it read. "No rush to respond. Just wanted you to enjoy the moment." I did enjoy it, more than I probably should have. But after the initial shock wore off, I found myself sitting there, debating what to do. Pretend I never saw it. That would be the easy choice. Or reject him out of hand. Send an automated email informing him that he wasn't the right fit for the company. But neither of those options felt right. I wanted to handle this properly. So I picked up my phone and called Victoria. "Let's bring him in for an interview," I said, my voice a mixture of amusement and anticipation. "I had a feeling you'd say that," she replied. I wish I could have seen his face when he got the email inviting him in for an interview. In his mind, he thought that was his chance to rewrite the narrative, to pretend the past didn't matter. Langford still carried some of his older characteristics and was still wearing a fancy dress suit as he showed up. I saw him before he saw me. I had positioned myself near the reception desk, casually chatting with the receptionist while peering through the glass. He scanned the room, his gaze shifting across the modern, polished space, searching for the person who held his fate in their hands. He was used to thinking he was too good for me, and he had not changed in my eyes. And then his eyes landed on me, and he froze. He tried to school his face into something neutral, but I saw the flash of dread in his eyes. I smiled. "Good to see you again," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "Ready for your interview?" To his credit, he managed a weak nod. "Didn't realize you were still here." "Oh, I'm not just here," I replied, my smile widening just so. I let him into the conference room, where I sat across from him, my resume folder neatly stacked on the table. Beside me sat Victoria and another senior consultant, both fully aware of the situation. Victoria, ever the professional, started with the standard questions. Tell us about your experience with client relations. Lanford launched into one of his signature self-aggrandizing speeches, managing to say very little of substance. I let him talk, let him believe, for just a few moments, that he had a shot. Then it was my turn. My tone was still polite, but the steel in my voice was unmistakable. How would you describe your management style? He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. The pause that would be the nail in his coffin. Oh, you know, he said, trying to sound confident, I believe in being a strong leader. I smiled. Right? And do you believe that humiliating employees is an effective way to achieve that? The room went dead silent. Lanford's face pale. His throat worked as he swallowed, trying to find the right words. I tilted my head, pretending to think. Because I distinctly remember an incident at your last company. You publicly mocked me in front of my old colleagues and made a joke about how long it would take me to find another job if you fired me. I wanted to tell him how I truly felt, how worthless I felt for his actions, but I kept my thoughts to myself. He didn't respond. The silence hung heavy in the air. Remind me, how long did it take you to find another job? Victoria cleared her throat, breaking the tension. I think we've heard enough, she said, her tone all corporate politeness. She closed her folder, exchanged a quick glance with the other consultant, and turned back to Lanford. We appreciate you coming in today, but we don't believe you'd be a good fit for this position. Lanford exhaled slowly, nodding. He knew there was no point in arguing. He was defeated. I smiled. You'll never make it without this job. I said the words from his lips. His shoulders slumped in defeat and his head dropped in sadness. That was the last time I ever saw him. Lanford never got another high-ranking job in the industry. The last I heard, he had taken a job at some small firm, a place that wasn't even a competitor, barely even relevant. No, this was just justice. Because the thing about people like him is that they eventually dig their own graves. All I had to do was hand him the shovel and watch as he buried himself. So, Reddit, did I handle this situation correctly? I'm really conflicted about the way all of this came about, but I wanted him to see what he did and what I had to go through because of his actions. It's been rough on my heart, but I was happy I got to stand up for myself for once. What do you think based on everything you've heard? Did I mess up or did I do what was right? Do you have any thoughts, opinions, or advice? I am all ears. Please share your thoughts with me.